All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're going to tackle a really fascinating puzzle. How do you actually measure a skill that you can't see? I'm talking about listening. It's something we all do every single day, but figuring out how good someone is at it, well, that's a whole other challenge. And really, this is the heart of the matter, isn't it? I mean, think about it. You can watch someone write something down, you can hear someone speak, but listening, that's a completely different animal. It's all happening on the inside. Exactly. The real work of listening. Figuring out sounds, interpreting what someone means, connecting the dots, all of that is happening silently, invisibly, inside your brain. That makes it super tricky to actually observe and say, yep, you got it. So the big question is, how do we make this invisible skill visible? So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll dig into why this is such a challenge, the invisible skill. Then we'll peel back listening's hidden layers. After that, we'll open up the assessor's toolbox to see the actual methods used, see how we get from sounds to stories, and finally, wrap up with why this matters. Okay, first up, the invisible skill. This is really the fundamental problem that anyone trying to assess listening has to solve right from the get-go. And there are a few big hurdles. The most obvious one is that it's an internal process, like we said. You just can't see it happen. On top of that, listening tests can make people really anxious, which can totally throw off the results. And honestly, it's just really, really hard to create a test that feels like a real-life conversation. But getting it right is so important, because listening isn't just this skill that exists on its own. It's the bedrock for pretty much all other communication. Your ability to speak clearly, to write well, even to understand what you're reading. So much of that comes back to how well you can listen and process information in the first place. So if listening is that foundational, we need to be clear on what we're even looking for. Before you can measure it, you have to understand its different parts. Because, listening isn't just one thing, it's got layers. Here's a great way to think about it. On one hand, you have intensive listening. That's when you're laser focused on the tiny details, like trying to catch a specific name in a loud airport announcement. On the other hand, you have extensive listening. That's more relaxed. You're just trying to get the general vibe of a conversation or the main point of a story. And we can break it down even more. Think of it like this. Micro skills are the nuts and bolts. Hearing individual sounds, noticing grammar, catching the intonation in someone's voice. But the macro skills are what let you put all those little pieces together to understand the big picture. Like, what is this person actually trying to tell me? What's their goal here? You need both to be a great listener. Okay, so we know what we're looking for. Now, how do we actually find it? This is where we open up the assessor's toolbox. It's full of these really clever techniques that are all designed to do one thing: make that invisible skill visible. One of the most basic tools is all about simple back and forth. Think about it. Someone asks, "Hey, what time is it?" And you say, "It's 2:30. You heard a short question and you gave a direct, appropriate answer. That's it. It shows you processed the information correctly in a quick, conversational way. Then there are times where you have to be more of a detective. This is selective listening. You're not trying to understand every single word someone says. Instead, you're scanning a whole stream of sound for one specific piece of information, like your flight number being called, or the one ingredient you need from a recipe video. And how do they test for this? Well, they use tasks like a listening close, where you hear a sentence with a word missing and you have to fill in the blank. Or something called information transfer, where you listen to directions and have to, say, draw the route on a map. Even just having someone repeat a sentence back can show if they zeroed in on the right details. And finally, you've got the marathon of listening, extensive listening. This is where you're taking in longer chunks of information, like a whole lecture, a podcast, or a long story from a friend. The goal here isn't just to catch one detail, but to understand the main ideas, how they connect, and the overall message. So we've got the tools. Now let's see how they're actually put into practice to go from just hearing sounds to really, truly understanding stories. In the real world, we rarely use just one skill at a time. So a lot of the best assessments combine them. The classic example is dictation. You have to listen carefully, which tests your micro skills, but then you also have to write it down accurately, which tests your writing. It's a really efficient two-for-one deal. And that brings us to tasks that try to act like real-life situations. It's not just about repeating something. First, you listen to a real-world prompt, maybe a voicemail from a friend. Then you have to interpret it. What do they really want? And finally, you have to come up with a meaningful response that actually makes sense in that context. And that right there is the ultimate goal. The gold standard in listening assessment is to use authentic tasks with materials that people are actually going to encounter in their day-to-day lives, not just some sterile recording made in a lab. And this stuff is everywhere, right? We're talking about things like podcasts, hello, radio clips, news reports, interviews, or even just recordings of two people having a casual chat. Using these makes the assessment so much more meaningful and a way better predictor of how someone will do out in the real world. So, we've looked at the core challenge, we've peeled back the layers, and we've checked out the tools. But, so what? Why does any of this actually matter? Let's bring it all home. This quote really says it all. At the end of the day, all of these clever techniques and tasks are about one thing: taking that silent, internal process of understanding and bringing it out into the open, where we can actually see it, measure it, and hopefully help people get better at it. And that's the big takeaway here, because whether you're a student trying to improve your skills, a teacher trying to help your class, or honestly, just anyone who wants to be a better communicator, understanding how this whole thing works gives you a huge advantage. So I'll just leave you with this question to think about. Now that you know all the different layers, the intensive versus extensive, the micro versus macro skills, how would you rate your own listening? Something to chew on. Thanks for joining me today.